Good morning and good afternoon to some. Welcome to today's webinar on TracerPlus Connect, Getting Started. I am your presenter today, Joe Crable. I'm a mobile solutions architect here at PTS. And today we're going to talk about what TracerPlus Connect is all about. So first off, let's talk about the agenda today. So we're going to talk about what is TracerPlus Connect, the key features and the use cases for it. We'll also give you a little update on TracerPlus version 10.8. Then we'll go into the live demonstration of Connect and setting it up and how to sync data. And lastly, we'll answer any questions that you may have during the webinar. And I'll bring that to the front. If you do have any questions, please feel free to chat them into the question panel, and we will address those at the end of the webinar. Okay, so what is TracerPlus Connect? So TracerPlus Connect is a software tool for your organization and business data sharing needs. It's developed to enable TracerPlus users like yourselves to quickly map and sync your data without any programming. And it's also enabled thousands of users to access mission critical data. Connect is meant for organizations of any size, so your Fortune 500 companies with thousands of users to your mom and pop shops with 1 to 2 users. This allows you to affordably share data between your mobile workforce and your office-based systems without changing any of your workflows. So why is TracerPlus Connect important? So TracerPlus Connect bridges the gap between mobile data collection and your enterprise systems and backend systems. It eliminates the need for manual data entry and reduces errors. It also improves operational efficiency across multiple industries. And its ease of use makes it a valuable tool for businesses and organizations looking to enhance your workflows without investing in extensive custom software development like a lot of folks tend to do. So some of the key features and use cases of TracerPlus Connect. So mainly, obviously, the data synchronization part allows you to seamlessly transfer and send your data to mobile devices and backend databases. So it's a two-way sync, including Microsoft SQL, MySQL, Oracle, Microsoft Access, or any cloud-based system. It'll also send to any ODBC compliant database, as well as text files, Microsoft Excel, CSV, web services, even custom APIs. No coding is required, so everything I'm going to show you today, you're able to do yourself. And you can actually download the product that I'm going to use, and the actual database that I'm going to use offers the same data that I'm going to be showing today. It allows for real-time or batch processing, so you can do batch syncing to and from the device. That would be through Wi-Fi or Ethernet connectivity, even WAN as well, or you can enable real-time data transfer using our live mode, where as you're saving data, it goes directly to your destination. Connect also supports encrypted communication protocols, ensuring that your data integrity and security. Some use cases in different industries. For retail, as an example, you can sync inventory counts from the handheld scanners to a central inventory management system. So today's demo, I'm actually going to show an inventory issue and receive function and how that can send data to and from the device. Another use case is for logistics in updating shipment data in real time from delivery personnel's devices, similar to how UPS does it. And FedEx, as you scan a package, it updates the tracking info. Can also be used in healthcare to integrate patient or equipment data with hospital management systems, as well as tracking of prescription distribution. And another function for this is manufacturing, where you can track parts and assemblies in a production line, also using a real-time transfer. So I also wanted to give you a little update on our TracerPlus 10.8 release. So that should be dropping any day now. Everything's ready to go. It just needs to be posted everywhere. So what 10.8 actually offers is some expanded device support. So those of you familiar with the new Zebra TC53E RFID device, that is that device that is in the same format as your standard TC53 device, but can also read UHF tags. So it is a short range read. However, it does now support reading that RFID data into TracerPlus. We've also improved connectivity with some of the other Zebra sleds, especially through the eConnects method. So it should enhance the experience when removing and putting a device back into one of those sleds using eConnects. So that should help with that RFID reading where the sled will automatically reconnect to TracerPlus. It should be more reliable for that type of connectivity. We're also targeting Google's latest API, which is Android 14 based, so we're now fully aligned with that. So keep an eye out for the release or the press release on that. All right, so now let's get to the good stuff. So now I'm going to jump into our live demonstration. All right, so what you're looking at here is our TracerPlus Connect software. This is what we're going to be setting up today. But before we do that, we need to grab a project from our desktop tool to be able to import and export, I should say, sync data to and from our desired destination. So I'm going to go to our TracerPlus desktop tool. So one of the projects I'm going to use today is available for everyone to use. It's on our app library. So I'm going to click the samples button here. I'm going to go to inventory management. And I'm going to scroll down to the inventory issue and receive. So here it'll give you a little brief overview of what the application does, as well as provide some screenshots of what it would look like. So to import, I'm just going to click next and then import. I'm going to go ahead and click finish. And here's our project downloaded from the app library. So this project consists of 3 sessions or forms, we'd like to call them. So this is your receive product. This is going to handle any incoming receipt of product and would essentially add to inventory. We also have an issue product that's going to do the opposite. That's used for sending product out, and that will deduct from inventory. And then we also have the actual product list that'll actually maintain our count of current inventory. So the way this project is designed is to keep track of inventory based on locations. So you can actually have the same part in multiple locations and track that quantity independently. All right, so I also have a mobile device connected to my machine. I'm going to bring that up. So I'm remotely controlling it using a tool called Visor. For those of you who are not aware of this, this is a very nice tool to be able to remotely connect to your device. You can connect via USB or even through a network connection, such as Wi-Fi or Ethernet, and it would allow you to remotely control the device, as well as take screenshots and give demonstrations such as today. So you'll see once you install TracerPlus to your handheld, which you can get through the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store if you're using an iOS device, you'll see this default sample application here. This consists of 6 sessions that are made to sync to our TracerPlus cloud. So we're going to replace this with the project that we currently have downloaded to the desktop software. So in order to deploy this to my device, I'm going to come back to desktop, click build deploy. and then click deploy again. That's going to bring up a QR code for us to deploy. So I'm going to go back to my device, click the menu in the upper left corner, and then click download project. Here I can now scan this QR code on the screen with the scanner. If your device doesn't have the scanner, you can use the camera. Okay, so you'll see that I have now downloaded that project to the device. Let me just close our deploy windows. And there's our 3 sessions or forms, one for receive product, one for issue product, and the last for view product list. So without Connect right now, you can't really do much in terms of syncing data to and from the device. We do offer a manual import and export, which can work for some, but it does require some manual interaction, meaning that you would have to physically connect the device to your PC via USB. You'd have to switch it to a transfer files mode, and then you have to manually copy and paste files to and from the device. That can be a bit cumbersome, especially if you're doing this a lot of frequently throughout the day. So that's why we recommend our Connect tool, which helps automate this syncing process. So what we're going to do now is set up the Connect to first sync data to the device. So we want to sync data to this view product list, because right now if we go to view data, you'll see there's no data currently loaded. So we want to sync our inventory list over to the handheld. So the first thing I'm going to show you is a simple sync from an Excel sheet. I'm just going to open this Excel sheet here. So I created a workbook real quick that contains 3 sheets, one for inventory. This is going to maintain our counts. And then one for received, which will sync any received transactions, and then issued to sync any issued transactions. So that's what we're going to first be syncing with today. So I'm going to jump over to the Connect software. We're going to go ahead and create a new project. And the first thing we need to do is create what we call a profile. So I'm going to click this green plus button in the upper left corner. And you'll see you'll have the option to create a sync profile or a live profile. So sync profile meaning it would be a batch type sync to and from the device. That means that data would be stored directly on the device and then exchanged via a Wi-Fi or Ethernet or WAN sync to and from your destination. The live profile, which we'll also show a little bit later, is what you would set up for real-time access to your data. So nothing would be stored locally on the device for that and would be directly communicating with the database. So for the first case in Excel, we're going to do the sync profile. And one thing that's highly recommended is that you link your desktop project to this profile. So I'm going to go ahead and click the folder right here. I'm going to go to my projects folder, and we're going to look for that project that we just imported, which is called Inventory Manage V6. And I'm going to select the TPP file. Once that's selected, click the Create Profile. And now we have our first profile. So we can give it a name. In this case, we want to send data to the device. So I'm just going to call it Sync to Device. Once we create our profile, now we actually have to add processes to this profile in order to define a source and destination. So I'm going to click the green plus button in the sync process list. We can also give this a name, and we're going to call it sync inventory list. Now you'll see we can select a source and a destination. So source being, we want to sync this data from that Excel doc. So the type here, we can select Excel. Then we can click the folder here to browse to where our Excel sheet is. So I'm just going to grab that path. So here's our sheet, Connect Demo. Once we select that workbook, The worksheet dropdown will be populated with the 3 different sheets that I showed you before. We have our inventory, received, and issued. Since we're syncing the list, we want to choose the inventory sheet. There's also an advanced button here, so if we click that, we can choose what row to actually start on. If I just bring this Excel doc in, you'll see that our first row of inventory is our column header. So we don't want to sync that over to the device, so we can change our start row to actually start at row 2. If you had additional information at the top of the sheet, you could also change that start row to be whatever you want. It could be 5, 10, 15. And then it wouldn't start looking for data until that row. So that's our source configuration. The next would be to configure where are we actually sending this data to, our destination, which would be our mobile device. And in this case, that would be TracerPlus. So because we married our desktop project to this profile, our session table or dropdown is populated with the 3 sessions that we have available. If you didn't marry up a desktop project to this, you would just see a generic list of 32 sessions with a generic list of 100 fields when you start to map. So tying your desktop project to this makes it a lot easier to configure your mappings. So like I said, we're going to be syncing this to the view product list. So we'll select that as our session. There is also an advanced option here. In this case for TracerPlus, it's just how many records per message are sent to the device. I can leave this at a default of 10. However, if you are syncing lots of data, tens of thousands of records, we would recommend changing this to something like 100 or even 250, and that can help speed up the sync. Next to destination, we also have options. So that's going to choose or set how this data is posted to the handheld. If we chose to append, that means every time we sync the data, we keep adding to it, which would not be good because we wouldn't want to keep adding duplicates. We can also update, but in this case, we don't typically do an update unless you're making changes on the Excel sheet itself. However, that overwrite function would typically take care of that anyway, so that's typically what I would recommend. You would just select overwrite. That'll overwrite anything currently on the device with what is currently in the sheet. So now you'll see at the bottom we have our mappings. So if we slide this sheet over just to show you, since it's Excel, we don't actually see these column names, location, part number, description, quantity on hand, because they're just part of the cells themselves. So we actually map to the columns, so A, B, C, D, etc. So we'll see that column A is location, column B is part number, C is description, and D is the quantity on hand. We don't need E, so we'll just delete that from the mappings. So there, that is our setup to sync data from Excel to our product list session. So I'm just going to go ahead and save this. And you can name it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it Connect Webinar Demo. All right, so now how do we actually trigger this sync to take place? So that would be done on the handheld side. So there are some settings we need to configure in desktop. So the first being the host. So if we go to the project tab, you'll notice there is a connect icon here. So if we click that, we can actually define the host of where we're syncing this data to. So that's going to be your PC or server that's running the Connect software. So I'll click the green plus button. I'll key in an IP address here. And then the port 4403, you can leave that as the default. And then to the right here, we have a sync feedback. That just shows the sync dialog, syncing X of X records. And we can also choose when to auto close that die along once we finish the sync. So I'm just going to set that to 1 second. And some of this other stuff we'll touch on when we set up the live. So there's our host. This is my machine. That's where we're going to sync to. So now we actually need to have something on the device that triggers this sync. So that's something we would add called a do sync button. So there's 2 ways to do this. You could add a button directly to the session that you're using. So I could add a button here for the sync, but what I like to do is actually add another session here. I'll call it sync. And you don't have to do this. You can add it directly to your session. And if we jump over to the form designer, I'm just going to create a blank canvas. We can change our background color here. And I'm going to add a button to the form. So I'm going to click over here in the left toolbar, click button, and then click on the form to place it. So you can see we have a nice intuitive drag and drop interface here. I can align the buttons. So then we can name this sync to device. And now we want to set this to a button action of do sync. So that's over here in the right-hand properties. Come over to the button action and look for the do sync button. So here's do sync. Once we do select that, you'll notice that you have a couple of sync settings at the bottom. We have the sync host ID and then the sync profile ID. So the host ID, that's going to be what we defined here as our host. So you could have multiple hosts if you're syncing to different machines. In this case, we have just the one, so we have host ID 1. So that is already set to 1. Now we can set the profile ID. So that's going to be from Connect, this profile ID up here in the top left corner. You'll see that it's ID 1. So that's what this should be set to, and it is by default. So that means when I click this button now, it's going to sync to this PC, and it's going to sync any processes that I have in that profile 1. Right, I'm also going to add a done button here just to close the form. And we'll set that to an action of done. Now I can deploy this to my device. So a little quick tip here, if you've already deployed the project to your device, you can simply click the F5 key on your keyboard. That will save and rebuild the project so that you don't have to click this build deploy and scan the QR code each time. So now if I just come over to my device, go to the menu, download project, I can just click download and then I'll get our latest update. So you'll see that I now have a sync session. So that's a new session we just added and now deployed to the device. We go into it, there's our sync to device and there's our done button. So now we can actually try the sync. So just one thing to note, if you are syncing with Excel, the sheet must be closed when you do that sync. So I'm going to go ahead and close it. Let's jump back over to Connect. And if we go to the Synchronize tab, we can see the progress as we're doing the sync. So I'm just going to click Sync to Device. So you'll see the activity down here. It's starting to connect, syncing 8 of 8 records, and then closes. So if I click Done, and I go to the View Product List, you'll see that we now have those 8 records that were in that Excel sheet. So here's our locations, our part numbers, descriptions, and quantities. All right, so now if we go to Receive Product, I can actually scan a barcode here. You'll see it'll look up our description, men's polo, so that's looking it up from our product list based on that UPC code. I can choose where I want to receive this to, so let's say stockroom 1. It's going to show us from that list of data we loaded that we already have 10 on hand. So if I click into this, I could add another 15 to receive, click save. Let's scan another item here. Scan the women's polo. We'll also say stockroom 1, which we currently have 30. Let's say we're going to add 10 and then click save. So now if we jump back over to the product list, we'll see that those quantities were updated. The men's polo is now 25 in stockroom 1 and the women's polo is 40 in stockroom 2. So whatever you receive will be updated to this product list session. Same goes for issued. So if we were to scan those same barcodes again, men's polo, we'll issue it from stockroom 1, showing that we currently have 25. Let's say we want to give out 12 or issue 12, click save. We'll scan the women's polo from stockroom 1, and let's say we'll issue 10 and save. So now if we jump back to the product list, you'll see that we now have 13 and 30. So that deducted it from our inventory. So now we actually want to get these updates back over to Excel. So the way we can do that is jump back over to Connect and go to Configure. We'll go ahead and click the plus button here under the Profile Explorer to create a new profile. Once again, we'll marry up our desktop project. Inventory Manage V6. Create profile, and then we can call this one Sync From Device. So we'll create a sync process. So we'll say that this one is to sync receive transactions. And this will sync anything that we from received product to our received worksheet in our workbook. So source is, in this case, is going to be coming from the device, so it'll be TracerPlus. The session we want to send this from is receive product. The destination being Excel. Choose our workbook, Connect Demo. And once that loads, choose our worksheet, which in this case will be received. Then configure our mappings. So if we open that sheet, and we look at received, we'll see that part number is A, received to is B, description is C, but then quantity received should be D and date received E. So I can click on quantity received, use these arrows here to move that up to match column D, and then I can move the date up to E. Then I can just use the red X to remove the excess mappings. So in this case, we do want to append to the sheet because we're going to have a running transaction history of our different receipt transactions. So we'll leave this as append. We also don't need to keep this data on the handheld after a sync, so we can jump over to the source options and enable the delete after transfer. So that's the sync for our receive. Now we need to set up one for our issue. So I can add a new process here. I can also use this copy function. So the rightmost icon here. I can actually make a copy of this and just change the name to sync issue transactions. Change the session to issue product and the worksheet to issued. One thing I didn't do in the first process is make sure you set the start row to 2, because that's where our column headers are 1. So we'll do the same here. And if we click this button here next to the red X with the grid, this will be the mappings reset. That'll reset all of our mappings. So I do happen to know that part is A, issued from B, description C, quantity to issue D, and date is E. And we can get rid of the excess mappings. And once again, we have append and delete. We're going to add one more process here that actually updates the inventory. So that's going to update our inventory sheet with the new quantities. So I'm going to name this one update inventory. Once again, the source is TracerPlus. The session is view product list, destination Excel, Connect demo, and worksheet should be inventory. Set our start row to 2. So location is A, part B, description C, quantity on D. We don't need that. We don't need to delete because we want to keep the inventory on the device after we sync that. But the options here would be different, and then we want to do an update existing, append if not found. So we want to do that based on column A and column B. So what this means is that when we do the sync to this sheet, if there is already an existing item that has that location plus part number, it will update the quantity. If it does not have that part number and location combination, it will actually add it to the sheet. So you could add inventory on the device itself if you didn't have it in your list using that add product list session. So that's what that update function with append means. If we just set it to update existing, it would still do the update if it existed, but it would ignore anything that's new. So I'm just going to leave that at update existing, append if not found. And we'll click the save button. So now we need a button that does this sync or this profile. So I'm going to take my sync to device, I'm going to copy it, we'll paste it, we'll just rename it sync from device. And the only thing we need to change here is the profile that we're syncing with this. So if we jump back to Connect, we can see that the ID of this profile is 2. So we'll set that sync profile ID to 2. The host doesn't change because we're still syncing to the same PC. The only thing that changed here is the profile. So that means when we click this button now, it's going to sync all 3 processes in this profile. So these profiles are a nice way to group a bunch of different syncs together. Now you could also create individual profiles for each of these processes. So let's say that you had a button within here, you only wanted to sync receive transactions, or you only wanted to sync issue transactions. You could actually add a sync button within here and then create a separate profile in Connect pointing it to that and just have sync receive transactions. So that's a way of separating your syncs into different buttons. You can't separate different processes within a profile into different buttons. So a single button can be tied to a profile, and any process in that profile will be synced. Okay, so now let's update our project. Click F5. Click OK. Come over to the device, go to our download project, and click the download button. So just to show you, if we go to receive product, we have 2 records. If we go to issue product, we have 2 records. And of course, we have our product list with our 8 records, but with the first 2 items showing 13 and 30. So if I just bring that Excel sheet into view, just to show you. go to inventory, you'll see that we have 10 and 30 here, so this first row should update to 13. So once again, when we do a sync, make sure Excel's closed. And we'll go back to connect to our synchronize. If we go to sync from device, it'll also give you a little overview of your last sync of each of these processes. So if I go over to sync, there's our new sync from device. I go ahead and click that. You'll see it's going through the different processes within that profile. So it was 2, 2, and 8. And if we open up this Excel sheet again, yep, so there's our men's polo is now 13 instead of 10. Women's polo is 30 still because it ended up 30 because we received and issued 10. If we actually want to see the transactions, so here's our transactions we did for the receipt, our part number, where we received it to, description, quantity, and the date we received it. Same goes for issued. These are the parts that we issued on these dates. So that can keep a running total of all your issues and receipts, as well as keeping the most current info in your inventory sheet. All right, so I'm going to close that. So there's a couple other functions with a batch sync or a sync profile. So one being the host. So this is good if you have a static IP, you can just key that in here. However, if your PC happens to have a dynamic IP address or an address obtained through DHCP that's not a reservation, you could put the PC's name or host name here. That can be used as long as your network resolves DNS internally. Otherwise, there's another option here to scan a QR code, and then I can even save that host. So I'll just show you what that actually does. Just going to build that project. Go ahead and download. So now if we go to sync, you'll notice that we have QR codes next to each of the buttons. So if I go back to connect, you'll also notice a scan to sync option in the upper left corner of the synchronized screen. So if I were to click on that QR code, it's going to bring up a QR code of the current IP address of this machine. So if you have a computer that changes its IP address frequently, or even infrequently, but changes, you may find that when you try to sync that it'll fail. So this is a good way to, for example, if I click sync to device, you'll see that now it says scan QR code to sync. So I can actually scan that QR code. It's going to now set this as my host and perform the sync. So this is a good way, if your IP address changes, you can just come over here, scan this, and it'll set it to the new host. Now, because I chose the save host option, if I were to click this button again, just go back to connect, it'll go, oops, sorry, I may have not actually clicked out of that. Let me just actually click and unclick that, redeploy. Go to sync. Click our sync to device, scan it. But then if I were to click it again, you'll see that it just goes right into the sync because it's saving that host because they had that save host option enabled. But you'll see that we do still have this QR option here. So if you do find that the IP changed and you did have the save host enabled, you can simply just click the QR code next to the button and scan it. And that'll trigger that sync. If I didn't have that save host enabled, you could actually require them to scan the QR code each time they want to sync. So if I were to uncheck that and deploy that, and I click that sync button, it's going to pop up that prompt to scan the QR code each time. Okay, so before we jump into live sessions, there's also sync timers that we can add. So this is a way to avoid users having to click a sync button. I would say that these should be used in specific cases, i.e. if you want to sync data overnight or something like that, because if you do have this set to run every, 5 minutes or something, when that dialog pops up, it will stop your users from using the device until the sync finishes. So we usually recommend doing these time syncs when the devices are not in use by folks. But if you did want to add a sync timer, you can click the add button. You'll see that you can enable or disable it. This is your interval in seconds. You can choose the host that you want to use for the timer. So in this case, it's our same host that we already have. And the profile that we want to sync with this particular timer. So if we had profile 1, it's going to sync our sync to device profile. And then also in conjunction with a timer, we can use a sync condition. So let's say we wanted it to sync after midnight. So I could click a date time as the condition. I could say after. We could put in midnight here, 12:00 a.m. So we could say after 12, and then we want to add another date and time condition that's before, and we could say, 12:01. And we set that to AM. So if we go back to our timers and we could say 45 seconds in this case, that means that once this timer won't trigger until it falls into these conditions here. So as soon as it hits 12 a.m., it'll trigger that sync automatically. And because we set the before to 12:01, it won't try to do it again and again. It'll just pretty much try that one time because we set it to 45 seconds. If I had set this to 15 seconds, it could run multiple times within that 1 minute. But I usually like to set it a little bit less than the actual minute, so I'd do 45. And then that would trigger that sync to happen right after midnight. Also note that for this trigger or this timer to work, TracerPlus actually has to be open and running on the device. It would be typical to put your device in a charger and leave it there overnight with the TracerPlus running. So that would be a use case for using the sync timer. I'm just going to go ahead and delete this for now. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is using a live profile to post data in real time to the database. So you'll see we have live sessions as an option here. So any session that you want to behave in real time or perform a real-time type connection, you would have to add as a live session. So I'm going to add our 3 sessions here: receive product, issue product, view product list. You'll notice we have that same host we can set for that sync button. So we have host 1, and then we have a profile that we can set. So we haven't created that profile yet, so let's go back to Connect. Let's click our new profile button. So in this case, we'll choose live profile. Click our folder, projects, marry up our inventory manage. And click create profile. So you'll see this profile is going to look a little bit different in that it's going to list all the different sessions that are available in that associated project. So that already adds receive product, issue product, view product. So that's why it's super important to map this desktop project to your profile. Otherwise, once again, you just have generic sessions 1 through 32 here, which would be a bit overkill if you only had a couple of sessions. So first up, receive product, we choose a type. So instead of a source and destination, we're just choosing what we're communicating with for the live data source. So in this case, we're going to do ODBC. And we're going to do our TracerPlus Connect sample. So this is a database included with TracerPlus Connect. So if you go ahead and install TracerPlus Connect today, you are getting this sample database, which does have tables for this specific sample project. So for receive, we want to select our product received table. Choose our key field, which can be set to ID. That's just an auto number, unique field. And you're still going to have similar mappings, of source to a destination. So you just want to marry these up to match. So we have our part received to description, quantity received, move that up. And then our date to our date received. Next up, we'll do issue product, same thing, ODBC. TracerPlus Connect sample. Instead of product received, this will be product issued. Add our ID as our key field. Remove ID from our mapping over here, so that'll better line up our fields. And then just move issue up and add date. Lastly, we'll do our view product list. That's going to be ODBC once again. TracerPlus Connect sample. And product list. ID is our key fields. Delete the ID mapping, so location, part, description, quantity. And then sync if you don't have a live session, or if you have a session in your project that's not enabled for live, you just don't have to configure it. You would just leave it blank like this. We just need our first 3 configured. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. So you'll note that our live profile is profile ID 3. So I'm just going to jump over to our data viewer just to show you the data. But first, we'll come over here, set our profile. Since our live profile is 3, that's what we would set our live sessions to. And if I jump back over to our device first, let's just check. So from that previous sync we did, we removed our received transactions, our issued transactions, but we still have our product list. Just to show you, I'm just going to delete that. You don't have to, because in the event that your Wi-Fi connectivity fails or you're in a bad spot for Wi-Fi in your facility, it can revert to a batch mode and then could reference that data that's already stored on the device and then send that data over once the connection is reestablished. All right, so let's go ahead and build our project to update it. Jump over to Connect, Profile 3. So here's our receive product, issue product, and product list. So you'll see we're directly communicating to this database table. So I could actually browse to that to show you where that is. So that's under C, Program Files x86, PTS, TracerPlus Connect 10, and then Data. So here's that access database. If I open it, just gonna slide that out of the way. Okay, so there's our database, product issued, product list. So there's those 8 records and product received. I'm just going to minimize that. So the data viewer tool here, that's just to view the actual data that's in that table. It's not a standalone table that it's sending the data to. We're just viewing the data that's in that Access database I just showed you. All right, so let's go to the device, do a download project. Okay, and if we were to view the product list, let me just check my connectivity. That is probably because I didn't change my host back. So another thing to note, the scan QR code is just strictly used for sync profiles, not live. So we want to make sure and reset this back to our IP, or in your case could be a host name. Just deploy that. Okay, go to view product list, you'll see it's refreshing. So there, this is a live view at this particular table. If I slide this over, it's going to have those same quantities, 10, 45, 25, etc. So now if I jump over to receive product and scan our men's polo, you'll see it still looks up our description. It's getting that live from this table. Receive to stockroom 1, it's looking up that quantity of 10. And let's say we received 25. Click save. If I refresh this table, you'll see that it jumped from 10 to 35. Okay, now if I were to scan that same product again, and let's say a different stockroom 2, we have 5 here. Let's say we want to receive 15. Click save. And you'll see this now updated to 20. But the polo in stockroom 1 is still 35. If we were to do the issue product, there's our men's polo, stockroom 1. You'll see 35. Let's say we want to issue 14. Save. Refresh, and now we're down to 21. And if we were to just look at the received product, refresh, there's the 2 transactions we did. Issue, there's the 1 transaction we did. And if we look at the actual database and just do a refresh, you'll see everything in there. That's already updated. And there's our transaction. So that is our live profile and how that works. A couple notes on that. Live mode is best used with a database. We would highly, discourage you from using it with Excel, because Excel can only have 1 user attached at a time. If somebody has that sheet open, you won't be able to communicate with it, and just the general slowness of Excel. And it's only able to typically have 1 user access it without marking it as read-only. This allows multiple devices to communicate and update stock. In this particular case, I could have 4 or 5 other employees out there doing receives and issues, all updating the same database in real time. They can all see each other's quantity that they update. So that's a good use case for live, as well as maybe at events where you're doing ticket scanning as well. All right, so if we jump back to Connect, a few other things to talk about. So if I were just to add another profile here, I'm not going to associate it to anything. I just want to show you some other options. So you have your SQL Server as an option. So if you are using a SQL Server database, we would recommend choosing the SQL Server as the type so you don't have to go through ODBC. So here you can just define where your SQL Server is, the database name, if you want to use a schema, whether you're using SQL or Windows authentication to access that database. Key in your username, password, click login, and then it will show your list of tables, views, stored procedures, and such. As we've seen in the previous example, ODBC can be used for things like Microsoft Access, MySQL, Postgres, typically most things that are ODBC compliant. Excel is for Excel. Text, you can do a text file, and you can select the folder where text may be. So if I were to select my desktop, it would look for any text files that are on my desk here. So typically anything that's TXT or CSV, I can also key something in. I could say new data.csv and click create file, and it'll create that file. And then if I clicked advanced, you can actually map your text files or create your columns. You can choose whether it's tab, comma, semicolon, space delimited. You can also use your own delimiter. So if you had like a pipe character or something, you can also use fixed width. We do have some clients using that for text files they're syncing to, because it has to be in a certain format when they then import this into a backend system. You can add a static file suffix as well as a unique file suffix, so you can create unique files each time you do a sync. And the binary file path, that's to do with if you're syncing images or signatures, you can actually send that data to a folder of your choosing. We also have a Salesforce option where you can sync data directly to Salesforce if you have your Salesforce info. And on the destination side, one other option is custom endpoint. So you could sync to a custom endpoint, which would be an SMTP server if you wanted to send an email, a URL if you want to do a post type function, or even keyboard emulation if you wanted to send data as if it were entered via a keyboard press. And once you do that, you'd be able to select that as the sender, and then you can define a report, which is created in a text file. I'm not really going to dive into that because that can get a little complex, but that functionality is available. One other thing we can talk about is the options for source filtering. I didn't really touch on that yet. So if you wanted to only send certain data, so for example, I only wanted to send inventory from stockroom 1, I could add a source filter. So if I were to go up to inventory list, click the plus button, so column A, static, stockroom 1. That means that when I do this sync, it'll only get data for stockroom 1. If you wanted to do a dynamic type sync, so meaning have it driven by the handheld as to what data they want, I could set this to a type of dynamic. You'll see that the value becomes NA because that's defined on the device. If I go back to desktop, go to our sync to device, that's what this sync filters option is here for the do sync button. So what I could do is add if I were to set this to stockroom, for example, and then add that as a field here. I could then go to the sync button, go to the sync filter, add a filter. So enter the profile ID. So these are going to come from Connect. That was profile 1 in Connect. It was process 1. And then also the filter ID, which you'll see is ID 1 here. And then I just choose the field that I want to sync from, in this case, stockroom. So now what I could do is I could enter stockroom here, click sync to device, and it'll only sync records that match this stockroom. So I could say stockroom 1, it would only sync those records. I could set it to stockroom 2, it would only sync those records. So that's a way you could do dynamic filtering of data sent to the device. That's also useful for employees using work orders, for example. Maybe you only want to send work orders tied to their particular user. They log into TracerPlus with a username, and then when they click that button, it can only send work orders for that user so that they don't see others. All right, so that's pretty much all I wanted to show. Sorry that ran a little long, but I wanted to show some good stuff here. Let me jump back over to our PowerPoint. All right, so if anybody has questions, please feel free to type them into the question panel and we'll address them as best as we can. I do see a couple of questions here. So one was asking what the name of the application was that I used to remotely control the device. That was called Visor, so V-Y-S-O-R. So that's this tool here. So if you just do a Google search for Visor, it should show up as one of the first results. Just download and install that to your PC. The only thing you do have to do is put your Android device in debug mode in order to connect to it. And we do have another question on here, if you can create a timer so that you can sync every 3 to 5 minutes. So yes, that is something we touched on briefly, but if you did want to sync every 3 to 5 minutes, go to the timer, and you could just set that to either 3 or 5 minutes. So if you wanted to do 3 minutes, that would be 180 seconds. Otherwise, you could set it to 300 seconds for 500. Okay, well, so it looks like we don't have any other questions at the moment. So I'll just put up our contact info today. I just want to thank everybody for joining us and taking time out of their busy day to see what Connect's all about. Some of you have used it before, some of you are new to it. So I guess we'll wrap this up and let you get going. So thanks again, everyone, for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day and have a nice holiday. Thank you.